Hey kids, happy Halloween. Um, Thought that this would be a good opportunity for us to just kind of hang out and talk about some of the history of Halloween. And so October 31st is generally looked at Halloween. We have our Halloween costumes on right now. And it's also an important anniversary. October 31st is the day that Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to possibly the door of the church in Württemberg, Germany, inadvertently kicking off the Protestant Reformation. As I have noted or will note for you, it's not really his intent. He wasn't trying to start a movement, he was simply asking intellectual questions. And it was not uncommon during this time period for someone to do something like that. But because of the printing press, those ideas spread, and those questions became the pieces of the reforms that many Protestants would look to, many Protestant leaders would look to as a way to guide them. So, history of the name. It originally is Samhain, and it comes from the Druids, a pagan religious group in Ireland. And this group, when we say pagan, what we talk about is based on nature. So, spirits of nature, spirits of the natural world. And when Christianity basically kind of forces the Druid priestly class and movement underground, the Christians will use that information. This is something I've always found kind of interesting historically, is when religions take over, religions replace older religions, and they use some of the same information in order to try and create links for the people so that it doesn't seem like a total shock all at once. And this is one of the ways in which they did that, because November 1st was looked at as the new year for the Druids. And if you think about it, this kind of makes sense. The new year being, okay, it's the end of the harvest season. And so as a result, it's, winter, you have this kind of dead period, and then things will spring back up in the spring, and you'll look forward towards the harvesting from there. When Christianity takes over, they use the same kind of dates or time periods of dates, November 1st being the All Saints' Day, and November 2nd being All Souls' Day. And so the day before All Saints' Day is known as All Hallows Eve, or All Hallows Eon, which All Hallows Evening, Halloween. That's how we get the name of Halloween itself. And then a lot of what we're going to see here during this mini lecture is the ideas of Halloween being brought to the United States and popularized in the United States thanks to the Irish immigrants. So as Irish immigrants, especially during the 18th and 19th centuries, are making their way from Ireland into the United States, they're bringing a lot of these customs with them. One of those customs being dressing up. And for the Druids, the New Year, the belief was that during that day, the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, meaning that there was a possibility for those in the living and those who are dead to kind of cross over or cross back and forth, or at least be aware of one another's presence. And so the idea of dressing up is coming from this time period, and it can serve one of two purposes: either to try and mingle with the dead, to cavort with the dead, or possibly to scare the dead away, so that the dead souls did not come into your house. So you would try to scare them away by dressing as these evil spirits as well. We're not totally sure which one of those two is probably the more correct of the two, but that's where the dressing up comes from. This idea of communicating or coexisting or scaring away those whose souls had died in the previous year or previous years. And this makes a lot of sense from a cultural perspective, because we also see this with holiday in Mexico, Dia de los Muertos, which is not Mexican Halloween. It's important to note, but the origins of both of those have very similar concepts. This idea of communicating or honoring the dead, specifically relatives of the dead in the case of Dia de los Muertos. Trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating is kind of cool. So again, the idea of this veil between the living and the dead being thin. It's possible that the idea of laying out food or sweets for the dead so that they did not come into your house, or so that they could be appeased, so that they did not want to come into your house. Then as Christianity takes hold, the idea of soul cakes, of offering up prayers for family members or for families in exchange for goods, food in this case. And so we have here kind of modernish takes on those soul cakes. You can see the crosses still being present, currants or jam or something like that being spread on top of them. probably the origins of trick-or-treating. But modern trick-or-treating actually springs out of an organized effort to stop looting and devastation. As people were going out and celebrating, this idea of the veil being thin between the living and the dead means that people are going out and cavorting and carousing and creating all sorts of mischief. And as a result of this, it got pretty bad. Like, there are stories in the early 1900s of people defending their homes from these mischief makers and actually shooting and killing teenagers and young adults who are going around causing thousands upon thousands of dollars of property damage. So you have just kind of this story here that I thought was interesting. Talking about Arlington Heights in Illinois, encouraging people to load up guns and shotguns and muskets in order to defend their homes so that people who are going around on this night aren't creating damage. So Great Depression hits, nobody has much money. And in an effort to keep whatever value you do have, there was a concerted effort by communities to create, let's take this negative thing and turn it into a positive thing. And so they started hosting kind of community events in an effort to ensure that you could kind of buy off the youths of the neighborhoods to keep them from doing property damage by offering candy and things like that. So the idea of trick or treating was an actual thing here in the United States, where it was like, either we're going to destroy stuff or we're going to, get something from you. And then jack-o'-lanterns being the last piece of this. So you can see on the right-hand side of your screen there, just an absolutely frightening image, and I'll get to that in just a second here. But the idea, it comes from, again, Ireland in the United Kingdom. The story goes, there was a man named Jack who was too bad to be entered into heaven, and he tricked the devil twice, so the devil didn't want him to come into hell. And so as a result, he had to walk the land for eternity. This is probably at least partially based on the concepts of purgatory that are aligned from Dante, going all the way back to the Renaissance. So this guy, Jack, the devil took pity on him, and so he gives him a turnip so that he could put a coal inside of this hollowed out turnip and carry it around with him to light the way. From a science perspective, if you're familiar with the bogs in the United Kingdom, they have, from the sulfurous fumes that rise, it creates like these wisps. And it's possible that the idea of these wisps encouraged this myth as well. So when we're talking about the United Kingdom, we're talking about turnips and hollowed out root vegetables. And so that's what you see on the right-hand side. You actually see plaster casts of some of these older OG original turnip jack-o'-lanterns that were created, and they look absolutely disgusting and frightening. But as the Irish bring these ideas over to the United States, well, not really root vegetables, but we do have in the Northeast, especially where they're initially moving to, pumpkins in abundance. Pumpkins are a hardy crop. It can survive colder temperatures, and they grow pretty big. So the turnips are replaced by pumpkins, and that's where we end up with jack-o'-lanterns. So hopefully you found this amusing. If nothing else, just a little history of Halloween lesson for you. As always, if you have any questions or want to find out more, let me know. Have a great day. Happy Halloween, and please be safe out there.